You got exactly $2 left in this world, girl. What are you gonna do with it? She bought coffee, black, no sugar, the cheapest thing on the menu because that was all she had. And when the most feared man in 3 counties walked through that door and the whole diner stopped breathing, Chloe Bennett didn't look away. She looked straight at him. And then she did something nobody in that room could believe. She walked over, and she gave him everything she had left. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The cold came in through the walls of that diner like it had a personal grudge. Not the kind of cold that makes you pull your jacket tighter. The kind that settles into your bones and reminds you that the world doesn't owe you warmth. That kind. The kind Chloe Bennett had been living inside of for the better part of 2 years. She pushed open the glass door of May's roadside diner at 6:53 in the morning, and the little bell above the door gave a tired little ring, like even it didn't have much energy left. The smell hit her first. Coffee, bacon grease, something sweet, maybe cinnamon rolls, warm and real, and absolutely not something she could afford. She counted the money in her coat pocket without taking it out. She didn't need to look. She knew exactly what was there. 2 crumpled dollar bills, one of them with a small tear along the corner where she'd folded and unfolded it so many times it had started to give up on itself, just like everything else lately. $2, that was the whole of it. She slid into the last stool at the counter, the one near the end, where the vinyl seat had cracked and been patched over with a strip of silver duct tape. She sat carefully like she was trying not to take up too much space, like she'd learned somewhere along the way that she wasn't really supposed to be anywhere. The waitress behind the counter, a stout woman in her 50s named Darlene with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a pen tucked behind each ear, looked up from wiping down the counter. "What can I get you, hun?" "Just a black coffee, please," Chloe said. "How much is that?" Darlene looked at her the way people look at someone when they're trying to decide whether to feel sorry for them or not. $1.75. Chloe nodded and set both bills on the counter without another word. Darlene didn't say anything either. She just turned and poured the coffee. But she poured it in one of the bigger mugs, the kind usually reserved for paying customers, who ordered a full breakfast and set it down in front of Chloe with something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite pity. Something in between. "You want some creamer?" "No, thank you," Chloe said. "Black is fine." She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into her fingers, and for a moment, just one small, quiet moment, she closed her eyes. She was 18 years old. She'd been awake since 4 in the morning because the cot in her Aunt Shirley's spare room had a broken spring that dug into her lower back, and somewhere around 3:45, she'd given up pretending she could sleep through it. She'd showered in cold water. The hot water heater in Shirley's place had been on the fritz since November. Braided her wet hair down her back, pulled on the same jeans she'd worn 3 days running, and walked 1.5 miles to the diner because the bus didn't run this early and she couldn't afford it anyway. She had a shift at the Dollar General starting at 9, 2 hours to kill, and $2 minus $1.75, which left her 25 cents and absolutely nothing in her stomach since the half a piece of toast she'd eaten yesterday at noon. But the coffee was hot, and right now hot was enough. She'd learned to be grateful for enough. The diner was maybe half full that morning. A couple of truckers at the far booth with maps spread across the table between them. An older man reading a newspaper, turning pages so slowly it seemed like he was memorizing every word. 2 women in matching scrubs, nurses, probably talking in low voices over plates of eggs, looking like people who just finished a long night shift and were hanging on by threads. A teenager in the corner booth with his hood up, earbuds in, staring at his phone. Ordinary people. Ordinary morning. Chloe sipped her coffee, slowly making it last the way she'd learned to make everything last. She was good at that now. Stretching things out, making small things carry more weight than they were ever meant to. She was thinking about the electric bill at Shirley's. Not her bill, not really, but she'd started contributing when she could because it felt wrong to live somewhere and give nothing when the door opened. And everything changed. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, the way a room changes pressure when something large moves into it. The bell above the door didn't just ring this time, it shuddered. And then the talking stopped. Not gradually, not the way conversations naturally fade. It stopped all at once like someone had pulled a plug. One of the nurses mid-sentence. One of the truckers mid-laugh. Even the man with the newspaper stilled, though he didn't look up, which itself said something. He'd heard that particular silence before. He knew what it meant. Chloe looked up from her coffee. The man who stepped through the door of May's roadside diner that morning was not a small man. He was the kind of big that redefined a space just by occupying it. 6'4" at least shoulders that nearly touched both sides of the door frame. A black leather vest over a long-sleeve thermal that did nothing to hide the fact that every inch of exposed skin, neck, forearms, the backs of both hands was covered in ink. Tattoos layered over tattoos, dense and dark, the kind that tell a story you're not sure you want to hear. His hair was dark and cut close on the sides, longer on top, and he had a beard that had been trimmed sometime in the last week, but had a roughness to it that made you feel like trimming it had been an afterthought. He wore boots, heavy ones, and every step he took across the linoleum floor of that diner was deliberate, not aggressive, not threatening, just certain, like a man who had long since stopped asking permission to take up space. On the back of his vest, a skull, a patch that everyone in 3 counties knew. Hell's Angels. And below that in smaller letters, a road name that had been whispered in this town like a warning. Grave. Jason Grave Walker. He pulled out a stool at the far end of the counter, 4 seats down from where Chloe sat, and dropped onto it with the controlled heaviness of someone whose body had taken a lot of punishment and wasn't in any hurry to pretend otherwise. He set both forearms on the counter and stared straight ahead, not at the menu board, not at Darlene, not at anyone. Just forward, into nothing. Darlene had stopped moving. The pen was in her hand, but she'd forgotten she was holding it. Chloe watched her. Watched the way the older woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way her feet shifted weight from one to the other. She wasn't afraid exactly. Darlene was too seasoned for that, but she was calculating, measuring. The same way everyone in that diner was measuring, the same way every eye in that room had found somewhere else to look except directly at him. Chloe was the only one still looking. She couldn't help it, because the thing she noticed, the thing that nobody else seemed to be looking at closely enough to see, wasn't the tattoos or the patch or the size of him. It was his face. His face was exhausted, not tired the way you get after a bad night's sleep, tired the way a person gets when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and they can't remember anymore what it felt like to put it down. She recognized that. She lived inside that. Darlene finally moved. She walked over slowly, carefully, the way you move around something you can't quite read, and set a menu down in front of him without making eye contact. "Coffee?" she asked. Her voice was steady, professional. Points to her. "Yeah," he said. One word, low, not rude, just contained. Darlene poured, set the mug down, retreated, and Jason Grave just sat there. He didn't open the menu. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't drum his fingers or fidget or do any of the small, restless things that people do when they're uncomfortable. He just sat there with his coffee and stared straight ahead, and the distance between him and every other living person in that diner felt enormous. Chloe turned back to her own coffee. She told herself to leave it alone. She told herself it was none of her business. She told herself that she had her own problems. Bigger problems, more immediate problems, problems that didn't involve walking into whatever complicated thing was sitting 4 stools down with a skull on his back. She told herself all of that, and then she heard it. She almost missed it. It was so quiet under the ambient noise of the diner, the hiss of the coffee machine, the low murmur of the truckers getting their voices back, the scrape of silverware, that she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. But she hadn't. It was the sound of a man ordering breakfast. Except the way he ordered it, voice dropped low. Words clipped short, asking for the cheapest thing on the menu. Asking Darlene how much before he ordered that was a language Chloe understood. That was the language of someone counting before they committed. She turned and looked at him again. Really looked. And she saw what she hadn't caught the first time: the worn edge of his sleeve. The way the leather vest, though it carried the weight of something official, something almost ceremonial, had been repaired along one seam with thread that didn't quite match. The boots were heavy and real, but the left sole had started to separate at the toe. She could see it when he shifted on the stool, and he'd done something to hold it together, glue or tape, she couldn't tell which. He wasn't riding high, he was holding on, just like her. And Chloe Bennett, with 25 cents left in her pocket after her coffee and absolutely nothing left in her stomach, and a 9 o'clock shift at the Dollar General that would pay her enough to cover the bus fare home. If she was careful, Chloe Bennett made a decision. Later, she would not be able to explain it, not fully, not in a way that made logical sense. She would try when people asked her, and people did ask her many times in many ways. And the best she could ever come up with was this: I wasn't thinking, I was just seeing. And I saw something I understood. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the $2 bills, both of them including the one with the torn corner, stood up from her stool, and walked 4 seats down the counter and toward the man that every single person in that building had been trying very hard not to look at. The diner went quiet again, a different kind of quiet this time. Not the stunned, held breath silence from when he'd walked in. This was sharper. This was the silence of people who cannot believe what they are watching and cannot look away. Darlene turned from the coffee machine and froze. One of the truckers actually set his fork down. Jason heard the footsteps, quiet footsteps, light ones, and turned his head. Slowly, he turned and looked at the girl walking toward him, and something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not suspicion. Something else. Something wary and uncertain, like a man who hasn't been approached without hostility in a very long time and doesn't know yet what this is. Chloe stopped in front of him. She placed the $2 bills, both of them every cent she had left in the world, on the counter between them. You look like you need this more than I do, she said. Her voice didn't shake. She hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed, it hadn't had time to be afraid. The words came out quiet and direct and completely without performance. And Jason Walker looked at the money, and then he looked at her. And for a moment, a long moment, a moment where nobody in that diner breathed, nobody spoke. You're serious, he said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was the sound of a man trying to understand something his experience had not prepared him for. I'm serious, Chloe said. You don't know me. I know you're sitting by yourself, she said. I know you ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. I know what that looks like. She paused. Because I've been doing it my whole life. Something crossed his face then. It moved fast the way things move fast on a face that's learned to keep things contained, but Chloe saw it. She'd gotten good at reading the quick things, the real things. Sit down, he said. She blinked. What? Sit down. He nodded at the stool beside him. Please. She sat. Jim. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just turned the $2 bills over in his hands, looking at them the way you look at something that doesn't make sense to you yet. Then he looked up at Darlene, who was still standing there holding the coffee pot like she'd forgotten what it was for. Whatever she wants, he said. Bring her whatever she wants. Put it on mine. Darlene looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at Jason. Jason looked at neither of them, just back down at the counter. I wasn't, Chloe started. I know you weren't. He said it without looking at her. That's the point. Darlene set down the coffee pot very carefully and said in a voice that had found its professionalism again, What can I get you, hun? Chloe looked at the menu board. She hadn't looked at it when she came in because there was no point in reading things you can't have. But now she looked, and for one brief involuntary moment, her face did something she couldn't stop it from doing. Something that was not quite a smile and not quite sadness, but lived somewhere in the complicated territory between the two. Eggs, she said, scrambled, and toast. And she hesitated. And Darlene said, orange juice, if that's okay. That's okay, Jason said. She ordered orange juice. And when it came cold and bright and real and sweet, she drank half of it in one long swallow without even meaning to, and then stopped herself, embarrassed, and set the glass down carefully. Jason was watching her, not unkindly. When did you last eat? He asked. She thought about the toast, yesterday, noon. Recently enough, she said. He didn't push. He just nodded. And they sat side by side in the loudest silence she had ever been inside of, because the whole diner was still holding its collective breath around them, trying to understand what they were witnessing. What's your name? He asked eventually. Chloe, she said. Chloe Bennett. Jason Walker, he said. He didn't offer the road name. He hadn't used it with a civilian in he couldn't remember how long. I know, she said. He looked at her then. People talk, she said simply. What do they say when... She considered this. She could have been diplomatic. She'd learned to be diplomatic. But something about the straightforward way he just looked at her made being diplomatic feel dishonest. They say you're dangerous, she said. They say you're not someone to mess with. They say, she paused, chose the next words carefully. They say you've done things. They're not wrong, he said. No defense in it, no performance. I figured, she said, and you walked over anyway. I walked over anyway. He looked down at the counter again. Why? Chloe looked at him for a moment, really looked the way she'd looked before she walked over the way that had seen past the patch and the tattoos and the wall of silence he'd built around himself. Because I know what lonely looks like, she said quietly, and I'm not afraid of it. I've been too close to it for too long. The words landed. She saw them land. She saw the thing that moved across his face again, bigger this time, less contained, and she saw him work to bring it back under control and mostly succeed. You're 18, he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was more like wonder. Yes, she said. You're 18 years old and you just gave your last $2 to a Hell's Angel because you thought he looked lonely. Yes, Jason Walker was quiet for a long time. Huh, he finally said. And that one small, unguarded sound was the first real thing he'd said in longer than he could remember. Bug. The eggs came, scrambled and fluffy on a warm plate with toast that was buttered on both sides. Chloe suspected that was Darlene's doing, in a small ramekin of strawberry jam on the side. She ate slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything now with a kind of careful intention, because she had learned that when you don't know when the next good thing is coming, you don't rush through the good things when they arrive. Jason watched her eat without speaking, and there was something in his expression. Not pity, not condescension, nothing uncomfortable, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement, like one survivor recognizing something in another. You live around here, he asked. About a mile and a half that way, she said, gesturing, with my Aunt Shirley. Your parents? She paused, set her fork down for just a moment. Gone, she said. 2 years ago, car accident, both of them. She said it the way she'd learned to say it clean, and even no excessive weight on the words, because if she said it any other way, she'd never be able to say it in public, and life required being able to say it in public. Jason absorbed that without comment. He didn't say, I'm sorry, the way people did when they didn't know what else to say. He didn't make a face, he just nodded slowly once. Shirley's good to you, he asked. Chloe thought about the broken spring in the cot, the cold water shower, the way Shirley sometimes went 3 or 4 days without saying more than 10 words to her, not out of cruelty, just out of a kind of grinding exhaustion that had made her nearly disappear from her own life. She tries, Chloe said, and she meant it. She's doing her best. That's a diplomatic answer. It's an honest one. He looked at her again with that same unreadable expression. You're careful with words, he said. I've had to be. Yeah, he said, and then so quietly she almost missed it. Me too. Oh. The diner had slowly, carefully resumed its life around them. Not fully, there were still too many eyes that kept returning to their corner. Too many ears tilted in their direction, but the white noise of normalcy had crept back in. Silverware on plates, the coffee machine hissing, someone's phone buzzing on a tabletop, and at the far end of the counter, something extraordinary was happening. 2 people who had nothing were talking. Really talking. Not the surface skimming or conversation of strangers. Something below that. Something honest and unguarded and slightly dangerous in the way that all really honest things are slightly dangerous. Jason had grown up in a world where showing anything soft was an invitation to have it taken from you. He'd built his whole life around that principle, had constructed the armor piece by piece over 37 years, until he couldn't always tell anymore where the armor ended and the person began. And here was this girl, this 18-year-old girl with wet braided hair and worn-out clothes and a frank, unflinching way of looking at him like he was simply a person. Just a person. He didn't know what to do with that. You got somewhere to be, he asked, glancing at the clock on the wall behind the counter. Work at 9, she said. Dollar General up on Sycamore. How are you getting there? Walking, he was quiet. That's 2 miles from here. 2.5, she said. I'm good at walking. I am. Darlene refilled both their coffees without being asked. She did it quietly, efficiently, and when she looked at Chloe, something in her face had changed. Something that had been cautiously neutral had become quietly warm. Anything else? She asked. No, thank you, Chloe said. This was really good. Glad to hear it, Darlene said, and she meant it. Jason wrapped his hands around his mug. His hands were large and marked with old scars under the ink, the kind of scars that come from a life that had not been careful or gentle. He looked down at them sometimes, and they felt like a record of someone he was still deciding whether to be. Why'd you really come over? He asked. Chloe looked at him. I told you. You told me part of it. She was quiet for a moment. When I walked in here this morning, she said I had $2. That's it. That's the whole of what I have right now. She paused. And I saw you sit down and I saw the way the whole room moved away from you. Like you weren't even a person. Like you were just a thing to be afraid of. She turned her coffee mug in her hands. I know what it feels like to be in a room full of people and still feel completely invisible. And I thought, she stopped, looked down. What? He said. I thought, what's the worst that can happen? She looked back up at him. I'm already broke. I'm already alone. If you'd gotten angry at me, I would have left, but at least I would have tried. A pause. I'm tired of not trying. Jason looked at her for a long time. You're either the bravest kid I've ever met, he said slowly, or the most reckless. Probably both, Chloe said. And something happened on his face then that hadn't happened in a very long time. He almost smiled. Not quite. Just almost. But it was there real and unguarded in the corner of his mouth for just a second before he caught it. Chloe saw it. She didn't say anything about it. But she saw it. She had finished her eggs and her toast and her orange juice, every last drop of it, and they had been sitting together for going on 40 minutes, and in that 40 minutes, the diner had continued its slow return to ordinary, and neither of them had run out of things to say. They talked about the cold, about the town, about the particular indignity of cheap coffee being the most reliable comfort available to people who couldn't afford better. Jason told her briefly, sparingly, that he'd been passing through on his way north, that he had club business in the next county, but had stopped because his bike had been running rough and he'd wanted to let the engine rest. Where north? She asked. He told her a town. She'd never been there. You travel a lot? She asked. That's mostly what I do, he said. Do you like it? The question seemed to catch him off guard, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple, the kind of simple that cuts through things. Sometimes, he said, sometimes it's the only way to outrun being still. She looked at him. What happens when you're still? He picked up his coffee mug, set it back down. Things get loud, he said, in here. He touched his temple briefly, just briefly. Chloe nodded. Yeah, she said softly. I know about that. How do you handle it? He asked. I stay busy, she said. I walk, I work. I try to find one thing every day that's good, even if it's small. Even if it's just, she glanced at her empty plate, hot eggs and orange juice. He was quiet. One thing, he said. One thing, she said. It's enough to hold on to. He sat with that, turned it over. And sitting in May's roadside diner on a freezing gray morning with the rest of the world, giving them both a very wide berth, Jason Grave Walker sat with the words of an 18-year-old girl who had nothing and thought about what it would feel like to find one thing worth holding on to. He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was asking the question. And just that was somewhere to begin. The clock behind the counter read 7:42. Chloe noticed it before Jason did. She noticed it the way people notice time when they've spent years running up against it, not with panic, but with a quiet dread that had become so familiar it barely registered anymore as an emotion. Just a fact. Time moving. The way it always did without asking permission, without caring what you were in the middle of. I should go, she said. She didn't move. Jason followed her eyes to the clock, then back to her. Work. I can't be late, she said. They dock your pay. A pause. And I can't afford to lose any more than I already have. She said it matter-of-factly. No performance in it, no reaching for sympathy. Just the plain truth of someone who had learned to say hard things without dressing them up. Jason looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I'll take you. She turned to look at him. What? To work. I'll take you. He said it the way he said most things, flat direct, like it was already decided, like the decision had been made somewhere before the words caught up to it. My bike's out front. Dollar General on Sycamore, right? Chloe stared at him. You're serious, she said. Third time I've been serious this morning, he said. Starting to think you don't believe me. Something in her chest moved. She couldn't have named it exactly. Some mixture of disbelief and something warmer. Something she'd learned to be careful with because it was the kind of thing that could make you foolish. She looked down at her hands on the counter, looked back up at him. I know you don't need it, he said, and his voice dropped half a register, just enough that it became something less like a statement and more like something honest. I'm offering anyway. There's a difference. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him. I've got a helmet, he said. It'll fit. And Chloe Bennett, who had spent 2 years learning to say no to things, because no things almost never came without strings, who had built a careful wall around the part of her that wanted to say yes to things, felt that wall do something unexpected. It didn't fall, it didn't crumble, it just developed a crack thin as a hairline right down the middle. Okay, she said. The word came out quieter than she intended. Okay, Jason said, and he picked up the $2 bills she'd put in front of him an hour ago and set them back on the counter in front of her. Take these back. I gave them to you. I don't need them, he said. You might. She looked at the bills, looked at him. She wanted to argue, she'd wanted to give them. It had meant something that she gave them. The giving had been the point, but something in the way he said it stopped her. The word might. Not you need them more than me, not pity, just the practical acknowledgement that 25 cents could be the difference between something and nothing. And he wasn't going to be the reason she ended up on the wrong side of that line. She took the bills, folded them, put them back in her pocket. Thank you, she said. He left cash on the counter, more than enough to cover both of them, more than the meal warranted. And he set it down without ceremony, the way people leave tips when they're not trying to make a point out of it. He stood in the stool beneath him, gave a creak of relief. Darlene appeared from nowhere the way good waitresses do, and collected the bills with a nod that held more warmth than it had when the morning started. You come back anytime, she said. She looked at both of them when she said it, and then they walked out together, and the entire diner watched them go. Nobody said a word, but the man with the newspaper finally lowered it and looked at the door through which they just passed and sat with his mouth open slightly like a man revising something he thought he understood. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Chloe stopped walking for just a second when she saw the bike. She'd expected she didn't know what she'd expected. Something loud, something aggressive. What was there was a machine that had clearly been ridden hard and lived in and cared for the chrome worn, but polished a bike that had covered serious miles and wasn't pretending otherwise. It looked exactly like what it was, a thing built for distance. Jason pulled a helmet from the saddlebag. It was a spare solid fitted with a dark visor and handed it over without a word. She put it on, adjusted the chin strap with the same careful competence she applied to everything, and then looked at him. You ever been on a bike? He asked. Once, she said, when I was 12. My dad let me sit on his friends. We didn't go anywhere. Something moved across Jason's face at the word dad. A quick recognition, careful and brief. He said nothing about it. Hold on to the rail behind you, he said. Or to me if you need. Lean with me on the turns, not against them. Don't put your feet down until I say we're stopped. Okay, she said, not scared. She thought about that seriously because it was a serious question. I probably should be, she said, but I don't think I am. He looked at her for a moment. That's either good or it means your danger detector is broken. Broken, she said without hesitation. Definitely broken. And this time it wasn't just almost. He smiled. Small, quick, gone again in seconds. But it was real and it was there and she saw it and filed it away someplace important. He started the engine. The bike came to life under her with a vibration she felt in her teeth and in her chest and somewhere deeper than that, somewhere she didn't have a name for. She gripped the rail. Jason rolled them out of the parking lot and onto the road, and the cold rushed at her face. And for a moment, one extraordinary moment that she would not forget for the rest of her life, Chloe Bennett felt something she had not felt in 2 solid years. Free. Not happy, not safe, not whole. Not those things yet, but free. Like the particular specific weight that had been sitting between her shoulder blades, his arm, Since the morning of the accident, since the phone call, since the funeral, since the first night on Shirley's broken cot, had lifted just slightly, just barely, but lifted. She pressed her hands against the rail and let the road go under them, and didn't think about the electric bill, or the Dollar General, or the 25 cents in her pocket. For 7 minutes, she didn't think about any of it. She was just moving. Fast. Forward. It was enough. They pulled up outside the Dollar General at 8:51. 9 minutes to spare. Jason cut the engine and let the silence come back. Chloe pulled off the helmet. Her braid had mostly survived, which seemed like a minor miracle. She shook her head slightly, handed the helmet back, and stood on the sidewalk looking at him, still on the bike. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride. And for," she gestured vaguely, which was meant to cover the eggs and the orange juice and the strange, improbable hour they'd just spent together. "For all of it." "Don't mention it," he said. He took the helmet back, set it across the tank. She was about to turn. She was almost already turning when the question came up out of her without warning, the same way she'd walked over to him earlier, before fear could stop her, before logic could talk her out of it. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. She hadn't planned to say it. She hadn't known she was going to say it until it was already out there in the cold air between them, direct and simple and almost unbearably sincere. Jason went still. Not uncomfortable still, not defensive still, something else. Something that happened to a person's whole body when something reaches them that they weren't prepared to be reached by. He looked at her, she looked back, not apologetic, not backpedaling. She'd asked the question she meant to ask, and she was going to stand in it. "Nobody's asked me that," and he started. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. But the unfinished end of it said more than the beginning. Chloe nodded like she understood, because she did. "I hope you are," she said quietly. "Okay, I hope you are." She turned and walked toward the door of the Dollar General. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't want to, because she knew that if she looked back, something would happen in her face that she wasn't ready for, and she had a 9-hour shift to get through, and she needed to be steady for it. Behind her, she heard the bike start. She heard it idle. She heard it stay there for longer than a gas engine needed to idle before pulling out. Then she heard it move. She put her hand on the door of the Dollar General and pushed through into the fluorescent hum of her ordinary life. And Jason Walker sat on his bike at the edge of the parking lot for a moment, just a moment before he finally rode away. He drove 3 blocks and pulled into a gas station and sat on the idling bike and stared at nothing in particular. "Are you going to be okay?" 4 words. He turned them over. He put them down. He picked them back up. He'd been asked 1,000 questions in his life, questions with knives in them, questions designed to corner him, questions thrown like accusations. He'd been asked things that were really tests, things that were really threats, wearing the mask of questions. He'd never been asked that. Not like that. Not by someone who had nothing to gain from the answer. He sat at the gas station for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the time on his phone. 11 minutes of sitting with 4 words. Then he rode north. He told himself he was done with it. The diner, the girl, the conversation that had lasted too long and gone too deep and cracked open things he didn't have the time or the inclination to deal with. He had club business in the next county. He had people waiting. He had a life that was built around motion, around purpose, around never sitting still long enough to feel the weight of the things he was carrying. He told himself all of that. He was 2 miles up the highway when he turned around. He didn't make a decision about it, not consciously. His hands just moved and the bike leaned and the road came back at him from the other direction, and he was heading back into town before he'd fully understood what he was doing. He didn't go to the Dollar General. He didn't know what he would have said if he had. He went back to Maze. Darlene looked up when he walked back through the door. The bell gave its tired little ring. The diner was busier now. The morning rush had come in, tables filled with people who had jobs to get to, kids to drop off, ordinary lives running on schedules. The stool at the end of the counter, Chloe's stool with the duct tape, was empty. He sat down at it. He didn't examine why. Darlene came over and refilled his coffee without a word. She set it down, started to walk away. "Darlene," he said. She turned back. She waited. "That girl," he said. "Chloe, she come in here often." Darlene looked at him with the careful, measuring eyes of a woman who had been reading people for decades and knew when she was being read back. "Often enough," she said. "When she can afford to." He let that sit. She always liked that. Like what? He paused. Like she's not afraid of anything. Darlene was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had taken on a kind of weight, not heavy, not sadistically, but real. That girl's been through things, she said, things that would have broken somebody twice her age. She's not unafraid. Darlene paused. She's just decided that being afraid's not a good enough reason to stop. Jason turned his coffee mug in his hands. You know her well, he asked. Well enough, Darlene said. She started coming in about a year ago. Always the cheapest thing on the menu. Always left whatever change she had as a tip. Didn't matter if it was 30 cents. She shook her head slightly. First time I saw her do that, I thought, who does that? Who tips 30 cents? She paused. Then I realized she wasn't tipping because she had extra. She was tipping because she thought about the people behind the counter. Darlene set the coffee pot down on the counter and looked straight at Jason. Now, what do you suppose that says about a person? He didn't answer because the answer was sitting in his chest, doing something uncomfortable to his breathing. She lives with her aunt, Darlene continued. Shirley Walcott. Works 2 jobs, that woman. Good person. She gestured with one hand, a gesture that encompassed exhaustion, limitation, the gap between loving someone and having enough of yourself left to show it. Just stretch thin, you know how that goes. He knew exactly how that went. And the girl doesn't complain, Darlene said. Not once, not to me anyway. Just comes in here when she's got the money orders. Her coffee sits at that stool. She nodded at the one he was on and reads whatever library book she's carrying. Always a library book, always something thick. She almost smiled. I asked her once what she was always reading. She looked up at me and said, I'm reading anything that takes me somewhere else for a while. Jason was very still. Something about those words, anywhere that takes me somewhere else for a while, caught in his chest like a hook. Because he'd spent his whole life on a bike trying to do the exact same thing. He just hadn't put it in those words. He hadn't put it in any words. She's a good kid, Darlene said simply. And then she picked up the coffee pot and walked away because she understood that she'd given him something to sit with, and sitting with it was the work that only he could do. He sat for a long time. Around him, the diner moved and breathed and turned on its axis of small, ordinary moments. Plates clattered. Someone laughed at something. A toddler in a high chair threw a piece of toast, and its mother said no in the tired voice of someone who'd said it many times today already. A couple at the corner table argued quietly over something on a piece of paper, a bill maybe, or a letter, something that had caused the particular pinched expression that financial worry always puts on a face. Jason watched all of it. He did this sometimes, sat in a place and just watched. Let the ordinary life of a room move around him like water. It was something he'd started doing years ago, back when he was young and angry, and everywhere he went felt like a battlefield. He'd learned slowly at a real cost that if you just sat still and watched, people would eventually forget you were there and go back to being real. And real people, real unguarded people going about their lives were endlessly, quietly extraordinary. He'd never told anyone that. It wasn't something you said in the circles he ran in. He was thinking about Chloe Bennett again. About the way she'd said, I know what lonely looks like. About the way she'd placed $2 everything on the counter in front of a man that half the town crossed the street to avoid and looked at him like he was simply a person who needed to be seen. He was thinking about that when his phone buzzed. He looked down at it. A message from a club brother. Where you at? Thought you were rolling north this morning. He typed back, delayed. Be there tonight. He put the phone face down on the counter. He sat with his coffee and the particular quality of silence that a person carries inside themselves when they've just been handed a mirror by someone who didn't know. That's what they were doing, and looked at what was there. What was there was not pretty. It was honest, though. It was honest in the way that only unexpected moments can be honest. The kind of honesty that sneaks up on you when your defenses are occupied elsewhere. When you're sitting in a roadside diner in a small town that wasn't even on your route, watching a teenager eat scrambled eggs like they were the most important meal of her life. He'd been running for 20 years. Not from the law, not only from the law, not anymore. Not for a long time. Running from the simpler, harder, more persistent things. The quiet, the stillness. The part of his mind that in unoccupied moments would start asking questions he couldn't answer. Who are you when you are not moving? What's left of you when there's no road? Is this actually living? He hadn't asked himself those questions in years. He'd gotten very good at not asking them. He'd built an entire existence designed to prevent them from arising. Constant motion, constant noise, constant forward momentum. And then a girl with $2 and tired blue eyes had sat down beside him at a counter and asked him one simple question and blown a hole straight through the whole structure. Are you going to be okay? He sat there until the coffee was cold. Then he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could calculate. He ordered a second breakfast. He didn't want the food particularly. He just wasn't ready to leave. He wasn't ready to get back on the bike and point himself north and go back to being Grave, the road name, the reputation, the function, when something in the last 2 hours had reminded him that he had been Jason once. Just Jason. Before the club, before the miles, before the armor. Just a kid who wanted to be somewhere he wasn't invisible. Darlene brought eggs over without being asked, set them in front of him with a small nod. You're still here, she said. I'm still here, he said. She studied him for a moment with those reading glasses on her head eyes. You going to be all right, she asked. And there it was again, the same 4 words. This time from Darlene, who was 61 and had worked this counter for 30 years and asked it out of the uncomplicated, unsentimental kindness of someone who just meant it. Something cracked open in Jason Walker's chest that he hadn't known was sealed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a quiet internal rupture, the sound a thing makes when it's been held under pressure for a very long time, and finally finds something that tells it it's allowed to let go. I don't know, he said. For the first time in a very long time, he told the truth. Darlene nodded, like that was an acceptable answer, like the honest answer always was. Eat your eggs, she said. He ate his eggs. At 11:47, Jason Walker left a $50 bill on the counter of May's roadside diner, walked out to his bike and sat on it for a full minute before starting the engine. He looked at the Dollar General sign visible down the road. He didn't go there, but he looked at it, and then he started the engine and rolled north and let the cold come at him through the open road. He rode for 6 miles before he had to pull over. Not for mechanical reasons, not because the bike was running rough anymore. It had smoothed out somewhere between the gas station and now the way engines sometimes do when they've had time. He pulled over because something was happening behind his eyes, something wet, something that had not happened in public or in private if he was being honest in longer than he could say. He sat on the shoulder of the road and let it happen. He didn't understand it fully. Not yet. He didn't have the language for what a morning in a roadside diner had done to 37 years of careful, deliberate armor. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with it, but he felt different. Not better, not worse, not fixed. Nothing had been fixed. His life was exactly what it had been when he'd walked into that diner 3 hours ago, but something had shifted. The way something shifts when a window opens in a room that's been closed too long. Just air, just a little air. He sat on the shoulder of the road with his hands on his knees until the thing behind his eyes was finished, and then he wiped his face with the back of his tattooed hand, started the engine and rode. And the question went with him, sitting behind him like a passenger. Are you going to be okay? He didn't answer it, not yet, but for the first time in 20 years he let himself want to. He rode for 4 hours without stopping, not because the road demanded it, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant sitting inside everything that morning had cracked open, and Jason Walker had spent the better part of 20 years building a life specifically designed to prevent exactly that. So he rode. The wind came at him hard and cold and indifferent, the way wind always was. It didn't care who you were or what patch you wore or how many miles were behind you. It just hit, and he let it hit, let it push against him, let the resistance of it be something physical to push back against, because the things inside him right now had no shape, no edge, nothing he could grab onto and fight directly. He made it to Carver County by early afternoon. The clubhouse was a converted auto shop on the edge of town, the kind of place that looked abandoned from the outside and probably should have given what went on inside. He pulled in, killed the engine, and sat on the bike for a moment in the sudden silence. Through the walls, he could hear voices, laughter, the bass thud of music, the ordinary noise of men who'd built their world inside a place where they didn't have to explain themselves. He'd found that world at 19. Angry broke newly aged out of a foster system that had never once made him feel like anything other than an inconvenience. The club had given him brothers, a code, a sense of something larger than himself. He didn't romanticize it. He knew exactly what it was and what it wasn't, but it had kept him alive through years that would have otherwise swallowed him whole. He sat on the bike and thought about a girl who'd found her own version of survival. Quieter, lonelier, built on library books and 30-cent tips and one act of courage at a diner counter. The door swung open. Grave, a broad man with a red beard and a road name stitched on his chest, Brick stepped out, arms open wide. Thought you were dead on the highway. Not yet, Jason said. He got off the bike. Brick clasped his hand, pulled him into a rough embrace, clapped him on the back 3 times the way men do when they want to show affection without calling it that. You look like garbage, Brick said pleasantly. Get inside. Jason went inside. The next 3 hours were loud and warm, and exactly what they always were. Beer he didn't particularly want, conversations he navigated on autopilot, business that needed handling and got handled. He was present for all of it. He moved through it the way he always moved through rooms, purposeful, contained reading, everyone in his peripheral vision saying the right things at the right times. But some part of him was still sitting on a stool at May's roadside diner. It was Brick who noticed. Brick always noticed. 22 years of riding together built the kind of knowing that didn't need words. They were outside on a smoke break. Jason didn't smoke, hadn't for years, but he liked the excuse to step out when Brick looked at him sideways and said, "What happened this morning?" "Nothing," Jason said. "You've been somewhere else since you walked in." "I'm right here." "Your body is," Brick said. He took a long drag and let it out slowly. "Whatever happened, you going to tell me? Or are we going to stand here lying to each other until our feet hurt?" Jason was quiet for a long moment. Then he told him, all of it. The diner, the coffee, the girl who walked over with her last $2, the way the whole room had gone silent, the conversation that had lasted 40 minutes and felt like 10, the ride to the Dollar General, the questions she'd asked him before she walked through the door. Brick listened without interrupting. That was one of his gifts. He was a large, loud man who could become completely still when something required it. When Jason finished, Brick was quiet. Then he said, "She asked if you were going to be okay." "Yeah. And you pulled over on the highway because of it." "Yeah." Brick took another drag, looked at the sky. "How old did you say she was?" 18. Brick shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in something closer to reverence. 18 years old, he said quietly, nothing in her pocket. Walks over to you. He paused. You know how many grown men in that room didn't do that? Every single one, Jason said. Every single one, Brick confirmed. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot. What are you going to do about it? Nothing, Jason said. What is there to do? She's got her life. I've got mine. That's not what I'm asking, Brick said. He looked at Jason directly, which was something Brick only did when he meant something. I'm asking what you're going to do about the part of you she woke up. Jason didn't have an answer. That night, he lay on a cot in the back room of the clubhouse with his eyes open and the question sitting on his chest like a stone. What are you going to do about the part of you she woke up? He thought about the pullover on the highway, the thing behind his eyes that he hadn't let happen in public in 20 years. He thought about the moment at the diner counter when she'd looked at him, not at the patch, not at the tattoos, not at the reputation, just at him. Like he was simply a person sitting next to another person, and that was all it needed to be. He thought about his own 18, the group home in Dayton, the social worker who'd told him not unkindly, which almost made it worse, that the system had done what it could, and the rest was up to him now. The parking lot he'd slept in for 11 days before someone from the club found him and brought him in. Nobody had ever asked him if he was going to be okay. Not once. Not his mother who'd left when he was 6. Not the foster families who'd cycled through his life like weather. Not the social workers or the teachers or the handful of people who'd briefly tried to reach him before deciding the effort wasn't worth the return. And then this girl. This girl who'd lost everything too, who was running on fumes and cold coffee and sheer stubborn will, who had looked across 4 diner stools and seen something in him that the rest of that room had decided not to see. She'd asked. He lay on the cot and let the question do its work on him, the way you let a bruise develop when there's nothing else to do. You can't speed it up. You can't stop it. You just have to let the body process what happened to it. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, he made a decision. He didn't make it loudly. He didn't make it with any particular ceremony. He just made it the way real decisions often happen quietly in the dark when you've stopped arguing with yourself long enough to hear what you already know. He was going back to that town, not for any reason he could fully explain, not with any plan, just back, because something had happened there that he wasn't done with yet. And because in 37 years of living, he could count on one hand the number of moments that had felt genuinely important, and he recognized one when it sat across from him and ordered orange juice. He was back on his bike before 6 a.m. Brick found him in the lot loading the saddlebag. He took one look and said nothing, just nodded once. Then, "You need anything?" "No," Jason said. "You call me if you do." "I will." He rode south. He pulled into the parking lot of May's roadside diner at 8:15 in the morning, 2 days after the first time. The bell above the door gave its tired little ring. Darlene looked up from behind the counter. She saw who it was. She did not look surprised. What she looked, and she would have denied it if anyone had called it by name, was relieved. "Coffee," she said. "Coffee," he said. He sat at the far end of the counter, not at the stool with the duct tape. He didn't feel right about that stool. He sat one down from it, leaving it empty. Darlene brought the coffee, set it down, started to walk away. "Is she?" he started. Darlene turned back, waited. "Does she come in before her shift?" he asked. Darlene studied him for a long moment. The kind of study that contains a question not about logistics, but about intention. About whether the person asking is something safe or something that's going to complicate an already complicated life. She must have found her answer because she said, "She doesn't work Thursdays. Thursdays she's at the library until noon." He nodded, he drank his coffee. He left a 20 on the counter and walked out. The library was 4 blocks from the diner. He walked it, left the bike where it was, walked 4 blocks through a town that watched him from behind windows and parted on the sidewalk around him with the practiced, slightly theatrical fear of people who've made a legend out of someone and aren't quite ready to unmake it. He pushed through the glass doors of the Millbrook Public Library. Inside, the quiet was immediate and specific, the particular compressed silence of a place built for thought, thick with the smell of paper and central heating and something that might have been old wood. A librarian behind the desk looked up and visibly recalibrated her entire assessment of her morning. Jason didn't stop at the desk. He walked past shelves, not quickly, just deliberately moving through the stacks the way he moved through rooms reading the space-taking inventory. He found her in the back corner. She was cross-legged on a low window bench with a book open across her knees, so absorbed in whatever she was reading that she hadn't heard him coming. Her braid was over one shoulder. She had a library card tucked between 2 pages as a bookmark. There was a half-empty water bottle on the bench beside her and a notebook, small, spiral-bound, clearly well-used, sitting closed next to it. He stopped a few feet away and said her name, quietly. "Chloe." She looked up, and the expression on her face, it moved through surprise, through something that wasn't quite calculation, but was adjacent to it, through something that was absolutely not calm, even though she composed it into calm within about 3 seconds, told him everything about what the last 2 days had been like for her. She'd thought about it too. She'd turned it over too. He wasn't the only one who'd pulled over on a metaphorical highway. "Jason," she said, not grave. Jason, she called him Jason at the diner, and she was calling him Jason now. And something about that consistency, that refusal to use the road name, the armor name, felt significant in a way he had been turning over since she had done it the first time. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." He glanced at the book in her lap. "If you're in the middle of something." "I'm always in the middle of something," she said. But she closed the book, set it aside, looked at him with those direct, tired, completely unafraid blue eyes. "You came back." "I came back," he said. "Why?" And there it was, the same quality of directness she'd had at the diner counter. No social lubrication, no small talk to ease into the real question. Just the real question, first immediately, because she'd learned somewhere along the way that the direct route cost less energy than the indirect one, and she had energy to conserve. He sat down on the other end of the bench, left space between them, put his elbows on his knees. "I've been riding for 20 years, he said, "and I stopped on the side of the highway 2 miles north of town because I couldn't get your question out of my head." Chloe was very still. Which question? You know which one. She did know. He saw her know it. I don't do that, he said. Pull over. I don't. He searched for the words and they came out slower than he liked. I don't do the thing where I let something get to me. I'm not built that way. Not anymore. But, she said. But, he said. She looked at him for a moment. How long has it been since someone asked you that, if you're okay? He thought about lying. The lie would have been easier, and he was good at easier. He'd spent 20 years getting very good at easier. Never, he said. The word landed in the quiet library and sat there between them. Chloe didn't flinch, didn't perform shock. She just nodded slowly the way she had at the diner when he'd stopped mid-sentence and left a thought unfinished, like she understood that some silences were the most important part of what was being said. I came back because... He stopped. Tried again. I don't know what I'm doing here. I want to be straight with you about that. I don't have some plan. I just knew I wasn't done. Done with what? She asked. I don't know yet, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He had the sensation of being read carefully, honestly, without agenda, the same way he'd read Rooms for decades, but softer, less tactical. I think, she said slowly, that you're the first person I've talked to in a year who actually listened to me. The admission came quietly, almost like she was thinking out loud, like she hadn't fully decided to say it before she was already saying it. What do you mean, he said. She looked down at the closed book in her lap. Shirley loves me. I know she does. But she's so tired all the time that when I talk, she made a small gesture with one hand. Nods. Like she hears the sounds, but not the words. And at work, I'm just staff. And at the diner, Darlene's kind, but she's busy. She paused. I have been talking into a room by myself for a really long time. Something happened in Jason's chest that he recognized now, that same rupture, that same sealed thing coming slightly open. I know that room, he said. She looked up at him. I've been in it my whole life, he said. And they sat there in the quiet library, two people who had been talking into empty rooms for years, sitting with the strange, uncomfortable, half-terrifying realization that they had somehow found the one other person in a 3-county radius who could hear them. It should have felt stranger than it did. Tell me about your parents, and he said, not because he thought it would be easy, because he knew it wouldn't, and he was asking anyway the way she'd asked him anyway. She was quiet, her hands tightened slightly on the book. My dad was funny, she said finally, like genuinely funny, not just dad joke funny. He could make anybody laugh. He drove a delivery truck, and he said he was friends with every porch in a 20-mile radius. A pause. My mom was the quiet one. She read a lot. She's why I'm here. She looked around at the library. She used to bring me every Saturday. Said books were the most honest things in the world because they couldn't pretend. Her voice had stayed steady, just barely. They were coming home from their anniversary dinner, she said. The other driver ran a red light. The police said they probably didn't feel anything. She stopped. People say that like it helps. Does it? He asked. No, she said, because it's not about whether they felt it. It's about the fact that I still feel it, every single day, and nobody wants to know that part. They want the story to have an ending where you're okay now. She looked at him. I'm not okay now. I'm functional. I'm managing, but I'm not okay, and pretending I am is exhausting. He looked at her for a long moment. Then don't pretend, he said. She stared at him. What? Don't pretend. He said it simply, without decoration. Not here. Not right now. You don't have to. And Chloe Bennett, who had held herself together through the accident and the funeral, and Shirley's spare room in the Dollar General, and 2 years of cold showers and broken springs and library books, as the only escape, felt something slide sideways behind her eyes. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and held it back with the kind of practiced force that speaks to how many times you've had to hold it back before. But her eyes went bright and her jaw tightened, and Jason saw all of it and didn't look away and didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, present, still, witness. It was, she would think later, the most generous thing anyone had done for her in 2 years. Not the eggs, not the ride. This, just staying while she felt something real without requiring her to minimize it for his comfort. After a moment, she breathed out, long and slow, steadied. Okay, she said quietly. Just that. Okay, he said. She looked at the notebook beside her, then she picked it up and held it for a moment before saying, "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "What do you want?" she said. "Not from me, in general, from your life. What do you actually want?" It was the kind of question that could have been naive, the kind of person ask when they don't know enough to know it's complicated. But coming from her with that particular quality of directness, it wasn't naive at all. It was surgical. Jason looked at his hands. "I don't know," he said. "I stopped asking that question a long time ago because the answer was always something I couldn't have." "What did you want?" she pressed, "when you were still asking?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "To matter," he said finally, "to be somewhere that would notice if I left." He paused. To not be another pause longer. To not be the thing people are afraid of. To be something they were glad was there. The words came out rougher than he intended. More than he'd meant to give. He felt exposed in the way that only honesty exposes you. Not the performed vulnerability that people mistake for the real thing, but the actual article, the kind that leaves you with nowhere to stand. Chloe looked at him. "You mattered to me on Tuesday," she said, "when I walked over. I wasn't thinking about your patch or your road name or any of it. I was thinking that person over there is carrying something too heavy, and he's carrying it alone." She paused. "You mattered." The silence that followed was the size of something enormous. He worked very hard at keeping his face still. He mostly succeeded. "You're 18 years old," he said, and it came out rough. "How are you?" He stopped. "How am I what?" "How are you this?" He searched for the word and couldn't find the right one and landed on the only honest one. "Good." Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite pain, but lived between them. "I'm not always," she said. "You're catching me on a good day." A pause. "And I think," she hesitated, "I think kindness is the only thing I have left that nobody can take away. Money goes, people go, but the choice to be kind," she touched the cover of the closed book. "That's mine. That's always been mine, and I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to let everything that happened make me stop making it." And that was the moment. Not the eggs, not the $2, not the ride to the Dollar General or the 4 words she'd asked on the sidewalk. This moment, this library, this sentence. That was the moment Jason Walker stopped running. Not physically, he would get back on his bike, he would ride more miles, he would carry all the same weight back out into the same road. But something internal, some engine inside him that had been pointed permanently at the horizon with no plan to ever stop, shifted on its axis, just slightly, just enough, like a compass needle finding north. He sat in the back corner of the Millbrook Public Library for another hour. They talked about his childhood, which he gave in pieces, which was all he had ever given anyone but more pieces than usual. About the foster system, about the first club brother who'd seen a 19-year-old sleeping in a parking lot and hadn't walked past. About what it felt like to belong somewhere, even if that somewhere was complicated and costly and not what anyone would choose on paper. She listened the way she'd listened at the diner completely, without waiting for her turn to talk, without the anxious half-attention of someone composing their own response while you're still in the middle of yours. She just listened, and he talked, and somewhere in that hour, something extraordinary happened. Jason Walker, who had a road name and a reputation in 20 years of careful, deliberate distance between himself and every other living person, told someone the truth about himself. All of it. The father he'd never met. The mother who'd left so early he barely had a face for her, just a feeling formless and cold. The group home. The parking lot. The first time he'd felt like he belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere had costs. The first time someone had died because of choices he'd been part of. The way that weight had never left. The riding, the running, the accumulation of miles as a substitute for meaning. He told her. And she didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't reclassify him into the version of himself that the town had agreed on. She just said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't give up." He looked at her. "On yourself," she said. "I'm glad you didn't give up on yourself, even when everything was telling you to." He couldn't speak for a moment. Outside the library windows, the town went about its Thursday. Cars passed. A woman walked a dog. Someone's kid was arguing loudly with someone's parent about something that would seem important for exactly as long as childhood lasted. Ordinary life. moving forward, the way it always did. Inside, two broken people sat in a back corner and told each other the truth about themselves for the first time in longer than either of them could say. And then Chloe looked at the clock on the wall. She always knew where the clock was. She was always watching, and something practical and tired moved across her face. "I have to go," she said. "I've got a shift at 4. I need to eat something first." A beat. "I have enough for a sandwich." She said it without embarrassment. Just fact. He stood. She stood. They walked out of the library together. On the sidewalk, the afternoon had turned colder, the sky that particular gray that can't quite decide whether it's done yet. She turned to him on the sidewalk. "Jason," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him directly with those blue eyes that had looked at him from the first like he was simply a person. "Come back tomorrow," she said, "to the diner, for coffee." He looked at her. "Not for," she started. "I know," he said. A pause. "Okay," he said. She nodded, pulled her coat tighter, turned and walked. He stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. Not the way you watch something you own, not the way you watch something you want, but the way you watch something that reminded you of what was worth wanting. He stood there until she turned the corner. Then he pulled out his phone and called Brick. Brick answered on the second ring. "Well," he said, "I'm staying," Jason said. "For a while, I don't know how long." A beat. "Okay," Brick said, "you're not going to ask why." "I already know why." "Talia," Brick said, "get a decent place to stay. Not a cot." He hung up. Jason stood on the sidewalk with his phone in his hand and the cold coming at him, and the town moving around him, still parting, still watchful, still carrying its accumulated story of who he was, and felt for the first time in 20 years something that he recognized only after he'd been sitting inside it for a full minute. He felt like he was somewhere. Not nowhere, not in transit, not between one point and another with no intention of staying. Somewhere. Just somewhere. It was enough. He found a room. Not a hotel, there was only one in Millbrook, and it charged $80 a night, and had the specific sadness of places that used to be something and had given up trying. He found a boarding house on Clement Street run by a woman named Ruth Adkins, 68 years old, hard of hearing in one ear, fiercely opinionated about everything from the weather to the federal government, and who looked at Jason Walker standing on her porch with his leather vest and his tattoos and his saddlebag and said without flinching, "You got money." "Yes," he said. "You going to cause trouble in my house?" "No," he said. She studied him for the length of time it took her to decide. $250 a week, she said, includes breakfast. You eat what I make or you don't eat. Bathroom shared. No guests after 9. No exceptions. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she said and opened the door. He moved into the room that same afternoon. It was small and clean and had a window that faced the street and a radiator that knocked every hour like it was making a point. He sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed. Not a cot, Brick's instructions, and looked at his hands and tried to understand what he was doing. He was staying. That was what he was doing. He hadn't stayed anywhere in 20 years that wasn't a clubhouse or a camp or a motel room with a weekly rate and no questions asked. He hadn't unpacked a bag with any intention of it meaning something in longer than he could calculate. But he unzipped the saddlebag and pulled out the few things he traveled with: a change of clothes, a kit bag, a worn paperback he'd been carrying for 2 years without reading more than 30 pages of, and he set them in the room with the deliberateness of someone who was going to be somewhere for a while. It felt strange. Not bad, just strange, like a muscle being used for the first time in a long time, that particular ache of something waking up. He was at May's at 7:15 the next morning. Chloe walked in at 7:40. She stopped just inside the door and saw him already at the counter. Not at the stool with the duct tape. She noticed the same one he'd left open the day before, and something moved across her face so quickly she almost caught it before it was visible. Almost. He caught it anyway. She was glad he was there. She sat down beside him without ceremony, the way you sit beside someone when the question of whether to sit has already been settled. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would." "People say things," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact she'd learned to live inside. "I know," he said. "I came anyway." Darlene appeared. She looked at the two of them side by side at her counter and did not say one word about it. She just set down 2 coffees and a small plate of toast, unrequested, unannounced, in the space between them, the way a person does when they've decided something is worth quietly supporting. Chloe looked at the toast, looked at Darlene. On the house, Darlene said, already walking away. Chloe pulled a piece of toast toward her and looked at Jason sideways. You told her to do that. I didn't, he said. You paid her extra to Chloe. He looked at her. I didn't. Some people are just kind, let them be. She was quiet for a moment. Then she took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed. I'm not good at that, she said, letting people. I know, he said. Neither am I. They drank their coffee. The diner filled up around them, the same rhythms as every morning the truckers and the nurses and the ordinary machinery of a small town running on caffeine and habit. But the corner of the counter where they sat had developed its own gravity, its own specific atmosphere. How long are you staying? She asked. I don't know yet, he said. A while. Why? She asked it directly, looking at him. Honest answer. He looked at his mug. Because I haven't wanted to stay anywhere in 20 years, he said. And right now I want to stay here. And I've learned slowly the hard way that when something is true and you ignore it, you pay for ignoring it eventually. He paused. I'm tired of paying for ignoring things. She looked at him for a moment. That's honest. You asked for honest. I did, she said. She looked back at her coffee. I have to tell you something. Okay. Last night I told my aunt about you. He went still. What did she say? Chloe paused. She said, she stopped, started again. At first she didn't say anything. She just did this thing where she gets very still and her jaw gets tight. And then she said, Chloe, that's a hell's angel. You know what those people, she stopped. She said things. Not she wasn't wrong about some of it. She's not a stupid woman. She knows things I don't know. She's right to be concerned, Jason said. Flat, direct. Chloe looked at him. I know she is. I'm not going to tell you your aunt's wrong, he said. She doesn't know me. From the outside, looking at what I am on paper, he let the sentence end there because they both knew what was on the paper. What did you say to her? He asked. I said he listened to me, Chloe said quietly. I said that in 2 years, nobody had sat across from me and just listened. And she got very quiet. And then she said, Chloe stopped, and this time the pause was longer, and the thing behind her eyes was real and complicated. She started crying. Jason looked at her. Your aunt. My aunt, Chloe said. Shirley, who I have not seen cry one single time since my parents died. She sat at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands and cried. Chloe pressed her lips together, and she said, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I haven't been there. The diner kept moving around them. Plates, coffee, ordinary morning. What did you do? Jason asked. I sat down next to her and I held her hand, Chloe said. And we talked for 2 hours. We talked more last night than we have in the last 2 years combined. She exhaled slowly. I didn't know how much she was blaming herself for not being enough, for not having enough energy. She thought I was managing fine, and she was so relieved that I was managing fine that she stopped looking closely enough to see that I wasn't. Jason was quiet. She loves me, Chloe said. She just got lost. People do that, he said. I know. Chloe looked at him. You unlocked it. I didn't do anything. You did, she said. You came back to that diner. And I told her about it, and it opened something between us that had been closed. She paused. So I need to say thank you for coming back, because you didn't have to, and you did, and it mattered. He didn't know what to do with thank you. He never had. It arrived in him like a sound in a language he understood intellectually but didn't speak natively. You did that, he said finally. You talked to her. That was you. We can argue about credit later, she said, and the corner of her mouth turned up slightly, and it was the first time he'd seen something genuinely light move across her face. It changed her completely. For just that second, she wasn't tired. She wasn't carrying anything. She was just a young woman with a sense of humor and a whole life still ahead of her. He looked away before she caught him looking. 2 days turned into 4. 4 turned into a week. Every morning at 7:15, Jason Walker sat at the counter of May's roadside diner and drank black coffee and waited. Every morning at 7:40, give or take 5 minutes, depending on whether she'd had to wait for the cold water to run through. Chloe Bennett came through the door and sat beside him. They talked. They drank coffee. Darlene brought unrequested toast and stopped pretending she wasn't watching them with the careful maternal satisfaction of someone who'd seen something good beginning to happen and was personally invested in it not getting ruined. The town watched too. Millbrook was a small town, which meant that everyone in it knew everyone else's business with or without trying, and the news that Grave Walker had taken up residence at Ruth Adkins' boarding house on Clement Street and was having breakfast every morning at May's with that Bennett girl had moved through the town's nervous system in approximately 48 hours. The reactions divided cleanly along lines of character. There were the people who thought it was trouble, and they weren't entirely wrong. They were operating on real information, and their concern was legitimate in the way that concern based on incomplete information is legitimate. The town's deputy sheriff, a compact man named Ortega, who had been watching Millbrook for 15 years, came into May's on the fourth morning and sat 2 stools down and ordered coffee and did not look directly at Jason. Jason noticed him the moment he walked in. He always noticed law enforcement. That particular alertness was so deep in him, it had stopped being conscious. Ortega drank his coffee. Then he said without turning his head, "You planning on staying long?" "Don't know yet," Jason said. Same thing he told everyone. Ortega was quiet for a moment. "You done your time," he said. It wasn't a question. "Twice," Jason said. "Both charges, served full." Ortega nodded, still not looking at him. "I'm not here to make it hard for you," he said. "I'm here because it's a small town and people talk to me, and I wanted to put a real face to what I'm hearing." "And," Jason said. Now Ortega looked at him. Direct professional, the face of a man who'd learned to read people and taken it seriously. "And you don't look like what I was expecting," he said. "What were you expecting?" "Something more interested in causing problems," Ortega said. "You look like a man who's tired." Jason picked up his coffee. "Yeah," he said, "that's accurate." Ortega finished his coffee, set money on the counter, stood. "I'm going to ask you straight," he said. "The girl, Chloe Bennett, she's had enough hard. She doesn't need more." "I know that," Jason said. "You sure? You sure?" Jason looked at him. "I'm the first person who's listened to her in 2 years," he said. "That's all I'm doing, listening." Ortega held the look for a long moment, then nodded, put on his hat. "You need anything while you're in town?" he said. "I'm at the station on Birch." He walked out. Darlene appeared from nowhere. She had an extraordinary gift for appearing from nowhere at precisely the right moment and refilled Jason's coffee without comment. "You handled that well," she said. "I've had practice," he said. "I imagine you have," she said. "Then he's a good man, Ortega. He's just protective." "He should be," Jason said. "She deserves people being protective of her." Darlene looked at him over the coffee pot for a long moment. "Yes," she said simply. "She does." The second week, Jason started doing something he hadn't planned and didn't announce. Ruth, his landlady, had mentioned in passing the way she mentioned everything directly without concern, for whether you'd asked that her roof had been leaking since October and the man she'd hired to fix it had taken her deposit and never come back. Jason spent 2 days on that roof. He didn't tell her he was going to do it. He bought materials with his own money and got up there early in the morning before Ruth was awake and worked until the light went. When she came out and found him up there, she stood on the porch with her hands on her hips and said, "What do you think you're doing?" "Fixing your roof," he said. "I didn't ask you to fix my roof." "No," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what you're doing up there?" "I spent 3 years in construction," he said, "before everything else." Another pause. "Well," she said, "don't fall off." She went inside. She didn't say thank you that day. She came out at noon with a sandwich and a glass of water and set them on the porch railing and went back inside. That was her thank you. He understood it completely. He told Chloe about it the next morning. She laughed. A real laugh, short and sudden and genuine. Join the kind that arrives before a person can curate it. He had been waiting without knowing he was waiting to hear that sound. "Ruth is terrifying," Chloe said. "She's efficient," he said. "I respect that." She came into the Dollar General last week and returned a mop because the handle was a 1/4 inch shorter than the box said, Chloe said. She had a ruler. He did smile then. He was getting better at that, at letting the things that were actually funny be visibly funny instead of moving through them with the flat containment he'd cultivated for decades. She's alone, he said. The efficient ones usually are. They build systems because systems don't disappoint. Chloe looked at him. You just described yourself? He considered that. Yeah, he said, I did. She turned her mug in her hands. What happened, Jason? Really? I know the outline. Tell me a specific thing. One true thing from before all the... She gestured at the vest. Before. He thought about what to give her. There was a teacher, he said finally. 7th grade, Mrs. Harlan. She had this thing every Monday. She'd write a word on the board, and you had to use it in a sentence before class ended. Just one sentence. He paused. The week I came to school with a black eye, my foster father at the time, he had a temper. She wrote the word resilient on the board, and she called on me. He stopped. What did you say? Chloe said. I said, he stopped again, looked down at the counter. I said, resilient means you keep going even when someone makes you feel like you shouldn't. And she didn't say anything. She just wrote a check mark next to my name and moved on. A beat. But at the end of class, she put a piece of paper on my desk. Just a piece of paper. And on it, she'd written, you are resilient. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Signed her name. Silence. I kept it, he said, for years in a shoebox, until the shoebox got left behind somewhere around age 22. He paused. I still remember every word of it. Chloe was looking at him with an expression that he was beginning to be able to read. It was the expression she wore when something hit her in the real place, the unguarded place, and she was deciding whether to let it show. She let it show. Mrs. Harlan sounds like exactly the kind of person the world doesn't make enough of, she said quietly. No, he said. It doesn't. I want to be that person, Chloe said. She said it the way she said the honest thing, not as an aspiration, not as performance, just as a fact about herself that she was sharing. I want to be the one who writes something down and puts it on someone's desk when they need it. She paused. I used to think I needed to wait until I had something, until I was stable or educated or whatever. But then I walked over to you with $2 and I thought, she stopped. I thought I'm waiting for a condition that might never come. And people need things right now. Not when I get better. Now. He looked at her. At 18 years old, sitting on a duct-tape stool in a small-town diner, with worn-out clothes and no plan, and more clarity about what mattered than anyone he'd ever met. You're going to be extraordinary, he said. It came out before he weighed it. He didn't take it back. She blinked. Don't do that. Do what? Put things on me I can't carry right now, she said. But it came out soft, not defensive. The way you say something when it touched you and touching you made you nervous. It's not something to carry, he said. It's just true. She looked away, looked back. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, he said. She finished her coffee. I have something to ask you, she said. Ask? She hesitated, which was unusual for her. She was not a hesitating person in general, and the hesitation told him this was something real. My aunt, she started. She wants to meet you. He looked at her. I know, Chloe said quickly. I know what it sounds like. And you don't have to. She doesn't have the right to. She's not my parent. She can't. Chloe. What? I'll meet her, he said. She stopped. You will, yes. Just like that. She loves you, he said simply. And she's been doing it by herself for 2 years. She deserves to look at the person her kid is spending time with and make up her own mind. He paused. I'd rather she know what I am and decide than not know and worry. Chloe stared at him. What? He said. Nothing, she said. You keep doing that. Doing what? Being more than I expect, she said. Quiet, direct, the way she said the realest things. He didn't respond to that. He didn't have the language for it in the moment. But he turned back to his coffee and something in the set of his shoulders shifted almost imperceptible. The kind of shift that wouldn't have registered on anyone less attuned to reading bodies than Chloe had become. And she saw it and understood it as the thing it was. He was moved, and he was allowing it. That was something. The dinner was 3 days later. Shirley Walcott's kitchen smelled like pot roast and something sweet. An apple pie cooling on the counter, which Chloe told him in a low voice was Shirley's version of armor, that she cooked elaborate things when she was nervous, because having something to do with her hands kept her from saying the wrong thing. Shirley was 54, small and compact in the way of people who had been carrying heavy things for a long time and had adapted their posture around the weight. She had Chloe's same directness in the eyes, though harder edge the directness of someone who'd been burned by naivety and had recalibrated. She shook his hand at the door. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Jason," he said. She looked at him, really looked the full inventory, the patch, the tattoos, the size of him filling her doorway, and then she nodded once and stepped back and let him in. The dinner was not comfortable. He hadn't expected it to be. Shirley asked questions the way lawyers ask questions, not conversationally but directionally, each one moving towards something she wanted to establish. How long was he staying? What was his work? What was his business in Millbrook? Did he understand that Chloe was 18 and had been through things that had already cost her more than most people her age could understand? He answered every question straight. No deflection, no polish, no attempt to present a better version of himself than the real one. "Yeah, I served time," he said at the point in the conversation where she was clearly circling it. "Twice. Both sentences completed. I'm not going to pretend I've made only good decisions because I haven't." Shirley was quiet. "What I can tell you," he said, "is that your niece is the most honest person I've met in 37 years. And talking to her has done something to me that I don't have a clean word for yet. And I'm not here to take anything from her. I'm not here to add to her problems." He paused. "I'm here because she reminded me that some things are worth staying for." Silence. Then Shirley looked at Chloe, who had been sitting with her hands folded on the table, in the specific stillness of someone who is very deliberately not intervening. "Did you know he was going to say that?" Shirley asked her. "No," Chloe said. "He doesn't tell me what he's going to before he says it. That's actually one of the things She stopped. "One of the things you what?" Shirley said. Chloe looked at the table. "One of the things I trust about him," she said. The kitchen was very still for a long moment. Then Shirley stood and picked up the empty pot roast dish and carried it to the sink and stood there with her back to both of them for a long moment. When she turned around, her jaw was set in the way Chloe had described, tight controlled the face of a woman not giving herself permission for more than she intended. "You'll stay for pie," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Jason said. They had pie. And something at that table between the three of them, over apple pie in a kitchen, that smelled like something long overdue, shifted into a new arrangement. Not simple, not without conditions or concerns or the ongoing complicated reality of what he was and what he'd been, but real. The kind of real that comes when people stop performing at each other and just sit inside the truth of a situation together. Afterward, Chloe walked him to the door. On the porch, the night had gotten cold. He could see his breath. "Well, c'est there," she said. "Well, he said, that went better than I expected," she said. "She loves you," he said. "That's all that was. She loves you, and she wanted to see it for herself." Chloe leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I mean tomorrow. Next week. You can't just—" She paused. "You have a life. It's somewhere else." He looked at her for a moment. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "And it's not—" He paused, careful with the words. "I want to be straight with you about what it is and what it isn't." "Okay," she said, steady, watching him. "There's a mechanic shop on the edge of town," he said. "Dunbar's. I talked to the owner 2 days ago. He's been looking for someone with engine experience for 6 months and can't find anyone willing to stay. I've got the experience." He paused. "I'm not talking about forever. I don't make promises I can't back up. But I'm talking about staying for a while, working, being somewhere." Chloe was very still. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you matter to this decision," he said. "Not because I'm putting it on you. It's my decision to make. But you're the reason I'm making it, and you deserve to know that. And you deserve to know that I'm not expecting anything from you in return. You're 18. You've got your whole life. I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not here to be something that complicates that." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to work at Dunbar's mechanic shop," she said slowly, "if he'll have me. And you're going to stay at Ruth Adkins' boarding house on Clement Street. For now. And you're going to have breakfast at May's every morning. That seems likely." She breathed out. Something shifted in her face. Something cracked open in a way that was not happy, but somewhere in the expansive, complicated territory of things, that are simply true and true in a way that changes things. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. That's okay. She pushed off the door frame, started to go back inside, stopped, turned around. Jason. Yeah. I'm glad you came back, she said, to the diner, that first time. Me too, he said. You didn't have to. No, he said. I wanted to. He looked at her. There's a difference. She almost smiled. The real one, the one that changed her face. Then she nodded once and went inside and closed the door. He stood on the porch for a moment in the cold. Then he walked back through Millbrook, through a town that still parted around him on the sidewalk, still watched from windows, still carried its story of who he was, and felt something he hadn't felt in the whole of his adult life. Accountable. Not in the legal sense, not in the club sense, not in the obligational sense of owing something to someone who could enforce collection. Accountable in the clean, straightforward sense of being a person who was somewhere being seen by people who knew his name, who would notice if he left. He made it back to Clement Street and climbed the stairs to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the few things he'd unpacked from his saddlebag and arranged on the small dresser. They looked like they belonged there. He lay back on the bed. The radiator knocked once, twice. Outside, Millbrook settled into its night, its ordinary houses and ordinary lives and the quiet machinery of a community that had spent a week adjusting its story about who Jason Walker was. One small interaction at a time, the Roof Ortega, the dinner, the mornings at Mays, the way towns do when something challenges what they thought they knew. And in a spare room with a broken spring on Clement Street, Chloe Bennett lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling and thought about $2 in a cold diner and a man who'd looked at her like she was real. She thought about the word her mother used to say back when Saturdays meant the library and the smell of old books and a woman with quiet eyes who believed in honest things. Brave, her mother had said. Being brave isn't having no fear, baby. It's having fear and going anyway. She'd gone anyway. She'd walked 4 stools down a diner counter with everything she had left in the world, and she'd handed it to a stranger, and the stranger had turned out to be a person. Just a person. The way everyone is if you look long enough. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, the broken spring didn't keep her awake. 3 months passed. Not quietly, not without difficulty, not in the clean, uncomplicated way that stories sometimes allow time to move when the hard parts are done. 3 months passed the way real time passes, with friction, with setbacks, with ordinary days that felt like nothing, and extraordinary moments that arrived without announcing themselves, and with the slow, unglamorous work of 2 people deciding one morning at a time to keep showing up. Jason started at Dunbar's on a Monday. Ed Dunbar was 61, bow-legged, and deeply skeptical of everything that hadn't proven itself through direct experience. He shook Jason's hand in the lot. The first morning, looked at the tattoos, looked at the vest Jason still wore. The vest, he hadn't been asked to stop, and he wasn't going to pretend to be something he wasn't, and said, I don't care what's on your back. I care what's under a hood, show me. Jason showed him. By Wednesday, Ed had stopped watching him from the office window every 20 minutes. By the end of the first week, Ed was bringing 2 coffees from the machine in the back and setting one on Jason's workbench without asking, the same way Darlene brought unrequested toast, the language of people who've decided something matters and don't want to make a speech about it. The town watched. It kept watching. That was the nature of small towns. They watched until they understood, and sometimes they watched longer than that, and sometimes they never fully stopped. But the nature of what they were watching began to change. It started with the roof. Ruth had mentioned loudly at the pharmacy counter, in the particular way of people who don't realize how far their voice carries, that her tenant had fixed her October leak without being asked. The pharmacist had told the woman picking up her prescription. That woman had told her neighbor. The neighbor had told everyone at her Thursday card game. By the second week, Mrs. Kowalski, 2 streets over, was asking Ruth if her tenant knew anything about furnaces. He did. He fixed it in an afternoon, charged her for parts only, and didn't stay for the coffee she tried to offer because he had a shift at Dunbar's. She stood on her porch and watched him walk away with her hand pressed to her mouth and something in her face that was trying to reconcile what she'd expected with what had actually happened. Things like that kept occurring. Not because Jason was running a campaign, not because he'd decided to perform goodness for an audience, But because he'd started noticing things the way he'd always noticed things, that deep peripheral awareness that had kept him alive in situations that required it, and the things he noticed now were different. Gutters pulling away from soffits. A kid at the gas station who looked at the ATM screen for too long before walking away. The woman at the laundromat sitting alone in a plastic chair with the particular stillness of someone who'd been crying recently and was trying to make sure nobody could tell. He started responding to what he noticed. Small things. Specific things. Not gestures designed for an audience, but the direct, practical kind of help that required nothing in return and didn't linger for acknowledgement. He left money, not large amounts that felt like coincidence rather than charity, in places where it would be found by people who needed it. He showed up to things that needed doing and did them and left. Chloe found out about most of this not from him, but from the town itself, which was talking about it in the way small towns talk about things that surprise them. "Did you know about the Kowalski furnace?" Darlene asked her one morning 3 weeks in. "I heard," Chloe said, "in the Gentry kid, the one who was short on bus fare last week." "I heard that too," Chloe said. "He's not telling you about these things, is he?" Darlene said. It wasn't a question. "No," Chloe said. Darlene was quiet for a moment, then, "You know what that means." "What? It means he's not doing it for you," Darlene said. "He's doing it because it's who he's becoming." She paused and the coffee pot in her hand was motionless for a moment, the way it got when she was saying something real. "That's different, Ed. That's the thing that sticks." Chloe sat with that. She was changing too, and she knew it, even though change from the inside always felt slower than it looked from the outside. The conversation with Shirley, the one that had broken open after 2 years of sealed silence, had done something structural to the house on Clement Street. They talked now, really talked. Shirley started coming home from her shifts and sitting down at the kitchen table instead of going straight to bed. And sometimes they talked for 20 minutes and sometimes an hour. And sometimes they just sat in the same room doing separate things, and the silence between them was warm instead of empty. Shirley fixed the cot. She didn't announce it. She just came home one Tuesday with a new box spring under her arm and replaced it while Chloe was at work. And when Chloe came home and found it, she stood in the doorway of her room and pressed her hand flat against the wall to steady herself. She didn't cry, but she stood there for a long time. That night she texted Jason Shirley fixed the cot. He texted back, "Good." Then after a pause, "How's it feel?" She looked at the new box spring for a long moment before she typed back, like something that should have happened a long time ago, and finally did. His response came after a minute, "Yeah, I know that feeling." She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought about how much could change in 3 months when two people decided to stop being afraid of each other and just be real. The twist came in the 8th week. She didn't see it coming, neither did he. It came on a Thursday morning at Mays, their morning the specific geography of their specific corner of the counter, when Jason walked in later than usual, sat down and didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes. Just drank his coffee with the flat, contained expression that she recognized now as the face he wore when something was happening underneath that he hadn't decided yet whether to say. She waited. She'd learned to wait. "I got a call last night," he said finally. "From who?" "Club," he said. He didn't look at her, just at the coffee. "There's something happening internally, the kind of thing that requires me to He stopped, tried again. "There are people in my club who are my brothers, who kept me alive when nothing else would. And there are things happening right now that, A long pause. "They need me there." The diner kept moving around them. Chloe's hands were very still on the counter. "You're leaving," she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "I wanted to tell you before I decided, because you deserve to know before I decide." She looked at him then, directly, the way she'd looked at him from the very first morning, like he was simply a person, and the truth of the situation was simply the truth, and there was no point in dressing either of those things up. "Are you in danger?" she asked. He paused. "Possibly." "What kind?" "The kind that comes with the life I chose," he said. He said it without excuse, without performance. Just the plain fact of it, the way he'd always told her, the plain facts. "I'm not going to pretend it's nothing." She breathed out slowly. "What happens if you don't go?" "People I care about might pay for it," he said. "That's not something I can live with. Whatever else I am, I'm not someone who lets his brothers take what was meant for him." Silence. You knew, she said quietly, when you decided to stay. You knew this could happen. Yes, he said. You stayed anyway. Yes, she looked down at her coffee, then back up. When do you have to decide by tonight? She nodded. The nod was slow and contained and held more inside it than a nod should be able to hold. Then decide what's right, she said. He looked at her. Just like that. Not just like that, she said, and her voice was steady but only just. It's not just like that, She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't matter. Because it does. You matter to me. And the last 3 months have been... She stopped again. She wasn't going to cry in May's diner. She'd made that decision before the sentence started. They've changed things for me. You've changed things, Chloe. But, she said, and the word was firm, and she found it from somewhere solid inside herself. But you have people who need you. You have a life that existed before I put $2 on a counter. And you can't cut yourself off from that life to stay in a version of yourself that you've only been for 3 months. She paused. That's not fair to you, and I don't do unfair. He stared at her. You're 18, he said. For the third time since he'd known her, he said it, but this time it wasn't wonder. It wasn't disbelief. It was something closer to grief. The specific grief of recognizing that someone you care about has a depth you can't fully account for. I've had to grow up fast, she said simply. He looked down at the counter. I'm going to come back, he said. You don't have to promise that. I know I don't have to, he said. I'm telling you because it's true. He paused, and for once, words didn't come arranged, they came loose and real. This is the first place in 37 years that feels like somewhere I chose. Not fell into, not ran to, chose. He looked at her. I'm not done choosing it. Something broke open in Chloe's chest that she had been holding carefully closed. She didn't let it show in her face. She was getting better at that, in the same way she was getting better at the opposite, letting things show when it mattered. She was learning to choose which and when. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He left the next morning. He stopped at May's before dawn, before Chloe's shift, before the diner was open, but Darlene was already there doing prep. And she opened the door when she saw him through the glass and didn't say a word about the hour. She poured him coffee. They stood on opposite sides of the counter in the early quiet and drank it. You'll be back, Darlene said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. I'll keep the stool, she said. She glanced at the one with the duct tape. Not that one, he said. That one's hers. Darlene looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said, it is. He left $50 on the counter. She started to object. For her breakfast, he said, until I get back, whatever she orders. Darlene looked at the money, looked at him, folded the bills and put them in her apron pocket without another word. He rode north. The road came at him the same way it always had, cold, indifferent, enormous. But something was different about the riding, something fundamental. He felt it in the first mile and kept checking it against what he knew the way you check an instrument you're not sure you trust, and it kept reading the same way. He had somewhere to come back to. That was the difference. 20 years of riding with nothing behind him and nothing ahead, but the next mile, the next town, the next reason to keep moving. And now there was a town with a boarding house on Clement Street and a mechanic shop where Ed Dunbar made 2 coffees without asking, and a diner with a stool that had duct tape on the seat and a girl who would sit on it every morning at 7:40 and order black coffee and read whatever library book she was carrying. He had somewhere. He rode harder than he needed to, not away from it this time, toward what needed doing so he could get it done and come back. He was gone for 6 weeks. They were 6 weeks that Chloe did not minimize to herself or to anyone else. They were hard weeks. She missed him in the plain, specific way you miss something that turned out to be load-bearing. Not dramatically, not in a way that undid her, but in the way that you notice an absence, because what was there had been real, and real things leave real spaces. But she didn't stop moving. That was the thing she'd learned from him, or maybe confirmed from herself through him, that you don't wait for the good things to come back before you keep going. You keep going because keeping going is the thing itself, because your parents drove away on a regular Friday evening and never came back, and you can't make anything safe by waiting for it, so you might as well move. She talked to Shirley every night, Real conversations, the kind that had started the night she told Shirley about the man at the diner and unlocked 2 years of sealed silence. She started applying for community college. She looked at the financial aid forms that had been sitting in a browser tab on her phone for 3 months and actually filled them out line by line in the back room of the Dollar General on her breaks, because she decided that the condition she'd been waiting for, stable enough, ready enough, secure enough, was never going to arrive on its own. She was going to have to build it while still being in the middle of it. She called the financial aid office when she had questions. She called back when they didn't answer the first time. She applied. Darlene noticed the change before Chloe did, the way people on the outside of a transformation always notice before the person inside it. "Something's different about you," Darlene said 5 weeks in. "Different how?" Chloe said. Darlene thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything, with the full weight of someone who didn't say things she didn't mean. "Less like you're surviving," she said finally. "More like you're deciding." Chloe looked at her. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think that's right." Jason came back on a Tuesday. She didn't know he was coming. He hadn't called ahead. She'd half expected a text, had been half watching her phone for 6 weeks with the specific discipline of someone who refuses to be caught watching, and there was nothing. And then she walked into Maze at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after he'd ridden north, and he was at the counter. Not at the stool with the duct tape, one down from it, same as always. She stopped inside the door. He turned. He looked different and not different. The same face, the same contained expression, the same particular way he held his shoulders. But something in his eyes had moved. Whatever had needed doing was done, and he'd come back with the specific quality of someone who has gone through a fire and made it through and knows now what they're made of. She walked over, sat on the stool with the duct tape. Darlene appeared, poured 2 coffees, set them down, and retreated. Perfect timing. Always. "You're back," Chloe said. "I'm back," he said. "You okay?" He looked at her, and for the first time, the very first time across all the mornings and all the conversations and all the honest things said in libraries and kitchens and on sidewalks in the cold, he answered that question without any hesitation at all. "Yeah," he said, "I am." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, picked up her coffee. "Good," she said. They drank their coffee. Around the Maze ran on its ordinary axis the truckers and the nurses and Darlene and the coffee machine and the bell above the door, and all the regular machinery of a regular morning in a small town that had slowly, imperfectly, genuinely revised its story about a man in a leather vest and a girl who'd walked 4 stools down a counter with $2 and a kind of courage that most people spend their whole lives meaning to have. A month after Jason came back, a letter arrived at Chloe's address on Clement Street. Financial aid, approved. She sat at Shirley's kitchen table with the letter in both hands and read it 3 times, because the first 2 times she couldn't make herself believe it. Then she put it face down on the table and put her face in her hands and let everything she'd been holding for 2 years come out all at once. Not grief, not pain, not the specific weight of loss, but something past all of that. Something that had been waiting on the other side of all of it for longer than she knew. Shirley heard her from the hallway, came in without knocking, sat down next to her at the table and put her arm around her niece's shoulders and held on without saying a word. She texted Jason from the table, "I got in." His response was immediate, "I know you would." She typed back, "You didn't know that." He typed, "Yes, I did. Since the minute you put $2 on a counter," and didn't look away. She sat with the phone in her hands and Shirley's arm around her shoulders, and the letter face down on the table, and outside the ordinary world running on its ordinary schedule, and inside a feeling she did not have a word for yet but would find in time. Because that was the thing about Chloe Bennett. She always found the words eventually. Jason Walker showed up at Dunbar's the next morning at 7 sharp. Ed handed him a coffee without comment, pointed at a transmission that needed pulling, and went back to his office. That was the whole welcome back. It was exactly right. He worked through the morning and thought about nothing in particular, which was new, which was something he was still getting used to, the way a life with some stillness in it allowed you to just work sometimes without the noise underneath, without the running, without the accumulating weight of all the things you'd refuse to feel. At noon, he walked to Maze. At 7:40 the next morning, Chloe walked through the door. She sat down on the stool with the duct tape. Darlene brought coffee. Outside, Millbrook ran its ordinary life. The town that had watched and adjusted and slowly rewritten its story, not because anyone had demanded it, but because something real had happened inside it. And real things change the places they happen in. A girl with $2 had walked 4 stools down a counter. A man had told her to sit. And the whole quiet machinery of what comes after the conversations and the rooftops and the furnaces and the library and the letters and the long road north and the longer road back, all of it had moved outward from that one moment, the way water moves from a stone, dropped in still water in rings, quiet and unstoppable, and far wider than the stone itself. That is what kindness does. It does not announce itself. It does not wait until conditions are perfect. It does not check your bank balance before it decides you have enough to give. It just gives. And what it starts, it cannot stop. Chloe Bennett looked across the counter at her own reflection in the dark window and saw someone she was beginning to recognize. Not the girl who walked in with $2 and borrowed warmth from a ceramic mug. Someone further along than that. Someone who had decided one morning 4 stools down with everything to lose and nothing to recommend the decision, but the simple fact that it was right to act on what she saw instead of looking away. And Jason Walker, who had spent 37 years being the thing in the room that everyone looked away from, finally understood what it meant to be somewhere someone would notice if he left. He wasn't Grave anymore. He was Jason, just Jason. And that, just that plain and unheroic and entirely real, was everything.